And I wonder if you can give me a quick thought on what we were talking about, which was these deportations, which appear to be done with an aggression and recklessness, that is to say, without regard for due process or even the legitimate histories of some of these people that sort of don't have anything to do in many cases with any kind of a gang, in the case of the Venezuelans, but also distinguished PhD candidates who are being scooped up on college campuses as well. I wonder if you can just give me a thought on all this.
Well, you summed it up very well. It's a disgrace. It's a national disaster. Needs to be. I just heard about the two professors at Columbia University who are fleeing to Canada. They've been offered jobs in Canada. They're going there. But what's more upsetting is the Trump administration ignoring the orders of district courts. And then you have the Speaker of the House of Representatives talking about abolishing district courts, because district courts are not in the Constitution. They were created by the Congress. So you have an assault on the judicial process. You have an assault on academic freedom. You have an assault on truth. And all I can tell you is this disaster this week with the lack of security by senior Defense Department officials and the Vice President of the United States and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense is one of the most shocking, incredibly irresponsible moments in American history. What is very concerning is the deafening silence of the Republicans. This is something that will haunt them for decades to come. But I believe that in the end, the courts are going to act. I'm looking particularly at the Supreme Court, because it's now clear that there are two justices who will tip the balance, Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts. And if they vote with the three liberals, Trump will lose 5-4 on almost every major issue. And clearly, Chief Justice Roberts, who is fully conscious of the fact
one of the things that
it's his court, so he's concerned. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the courts are really as I was saying before, one of the institutions that that they have to focus on, because they've really cowed media in large measure. I mean, it may not be complete, but I'd say it's in large measure underway. They've cowed academia. You've seen the way that Columbia caved to them to get the federal money, and other institutions are
$400,000
to fall in line.
It's a bribe.
$400 million.
I want to be clear. I am pro-Israel. I am a Zionist. I am very active in the Jewish community. I oppose what is happening at Columbia University. To dangle money, $400 million, in order to get Columbia to conform to what the Trump administration wants is outrageous. The answer should have been take a flying leap, and I really believe that to be true.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that you mention your own personal situation, because you have. So I'll just say that it actually is a net negative for the Jewish community. If anyone could look at this and say, well, they're fighting anti-Semitism, or at least they're on our side.
They're not fighting anti-Semitism.
Exactly. They're not.
It has nothing to do with fighting anti-Semitism. And most members of the Jewish community understand that fully. I can tell you that the horror at what is happening is
many of the students who are, sorry to interrupt, I was going to say, many of the students who were involved in this protest, half the students there were Jewish. There was a bunch of Jewish students on the campus of Columbia and the campus of UCLA and all these others. It wasn't as though it was just Arab students who were protesting. It was really a representation of a coalition.
Let me be clear. If I were at Columbia and this were happening, I would be joining the protest. Not over what Israel does in terms of foreign policy or even about Jew hatred in America. I would be joining it because I believe in academic freedom and freedom of expression, and that applies to whoever takes whatever side in this conflict.
So there it was. Albert's got a couple of pictures now up. It was look, you can argue about the way in which, and I did argue about the way in which these protests both were held and how they were handled. That is different. Very different, a day's drive away from the way you scoop up these students and deport them, and
it's terrible. It's a disgrace.
And you withdraw monies from these institutions, and this was even more about DEI and other things that sort of adjacent to the anti-Semitism. In other words, they rode in on anti-Semitism, but then they had a bunch of other demands for Columbia and other academic institutions.
No, you're absolutely right. May I also point out, because I haven't been here since the fiasco of Donald Trump having signed an executive order about the Alien Act and now saying, well, he didn't do it, John Adams did. It is one of the most disgraceful things, because all you have to do is go to the White House website and see the darn proclamation signed by Donald J. Trump. The fact is, there is no truth in this administration, and that's what we're learning now in this whole scandal over this Defense Department business. And
yeah, so let's get to the Defense Department business now. One of the things that developed that I thought was worth noting, and then I'll get your thoughts, was that I originally thought Michael Waltz is the guy who was the NSA dude who put together the Signal group. Okay, so
who included Jeffrey Goldberg.
Right. So he's the guy who puts that group together and includes, as John says, Jeffrey Goldberg. So he has done a lot of things. He said, I don't know how that guy got on there. He's a POS, and I don't have his number in my phone. And it was all this stuff of, I didn't know this man. It was kind of Trumpian the way he was going after it. The only way the guy could have gotten on there was if he's on your phone. Okay, dude, you can't,
And if he was formally invited.
Yeah, exactly. So, he said, I've never met Jeffrey Goldberg. That's his latest. Well, Albert, show them the picture, if you would please, of Jeffrey Goldberg alongside Michael Waltz. This is at I believe, a White House event or something. There they are, the two of them together. All right. Not only do they know each other, but I promise you, Jeffrey Goldberg's number is on Michael Waltz's phone. That's the only way it could be in a Signal chat like this. So the way they've gone after the reporter and the number of stories that have emerged to cover this up and to explain it away is quite extraordinary. I want you also to see Tulsi Gabbard. Run a little bit of Tulsi Gabbard as she does the two-step in front of this congressional committee.
Member, my answer yesterday was based on my recollection or the lack thereof on the details that were posted there. I was not, and what was shared today reflects the fact that I was not directly involved with that part of the Signal chat, and replied at the end reflecting the effects, the very brief effects that the National Security Advisor had shared.
So it's your testimony that less than 2 weeks ago, you were on a Signal chat that had all of this information about F-18s and MQ-9 Reapers and targets on strike, and you in that 2-week period simply forgot that was there. That's your testimony?
My testimony is I did not recall the exact details of what was included there.
That was not your testimony. Your testimony was that you were not aware of anything related to weapons packages, targets, and timing.
Member, my answer yesterday was based on.
Yeah, so that
it's a disgrace.
Yeah, so what,
and may I tell you, they all should be fired, all of them, including the Secretary of Defense. Pete Hegseth is absolutely unfit for the job. We knew it before he was confirmed. But here's the kicker: the silence of the Republicans, who should know better. And I really believe that when elections are held, as they will be in 2026, that in the midterm elections, this will come back to haunt the Republicans. And they're beginning to become aware of it, Mark. They're getting scared, and they should be.
Well, it's interesting. I'd love to talk to you about the elections and whether or not they'll happen in the configuration and the way.
Of course they'll happen. Of course they'll happen.
Well,
There's no
we'll talk
question
about it another time. No, I don't want to get into that now. I did want to ask you about, you also said the institutions of the United States you have great faith in, and you give me that stuff also, John. I think you have to open your mind to the fact that we're not in your daddy's America anymore. This is a scary time.
If the courts fail, you will be correct.
Okay.
If, as I believe,
it's possible. You gave me the scenario by which it could happen.
If, as I believe, or I want to believe, the structure of the courts holds, and the midterm elections produce the results I believe they will, it will be a stunning repudiation. And if you take a look at the polls today, Donald Trump is at an all-time low in popularity. And the reason is because of his own people. And let me tell you, if the Trump administration goes after Social Security and
what do you mean if? They've already done it.
No, I understand, but people haven't felt it yet. You have to feel it. You
try calling the Social Security Administration. You'll feel it.
That's
as
exactly my point.
Yeah,
that's exactly
now.
my point.
Yeah.
But the American people haven't felt it yet, and that is something that we all have to be completely aware of. If 80 million Americans are denied the Medicare that is required or offered, that too will have an impact. May I say, you just sort of glanced on the question of what's happening at Health and Human Services, where 10,000 people are being laid off. And I can tell you, if there is another pandemic, who do you think they're going to blame? They're not going to blame Robert Kennedy Jr. They're going to blame Donald Trump, both of them, I guess, which is exactly correct. What Donald Trump is doing is digging his own hole. The hubris of this administration is so shocking to me that, and it should be shocking to the American people, and I believe it is.
The GOP, you were mentioning the investigations. There are lawmakers that are pressing for investigations of this group chat, and they are Republican senators calling for this investigation. Now, the Senate Armed Services Committee Chair, Roger Wicker, he's from Mississippi, he actually made the comments that his committee will investigate the matter, but also called on the Defense Department's Inspector General to launch a probe. He said, we'll certainly be asking the IG to look into it. Now, again, I think there's going to be sort of a tepid investigation to this. They sort of don't want to arouse the ire of the king. But nonetheless, just because you mentioned it, I mean, there are rumblings within the GOP.
Of course there are.
Yeah.
They're coming from Republicans. The Republicans aren't stupid. And remember, the first job of every politician is to get reelected. And they are not going to tie themselves to somebody who is falling in the polls. Look, you have the Vice President of the United States and his wife going to Greenland to try to tell Greenland they belong in the United States of America. You have the president still talking about Canada as the 51st state. You have threats to the Panama Canal. You have all of these tensions, not to mention what's going on in Ukraine. It is, to me, one of the most astounding things. And I will say one thing about Donald Trump. What they've done in this administration is throw so much stuff out. It's a way of not letting us focus on the things that really matter. And it's terrible. It's a disgrace.
That was the plan. Bannon spoke of it, and it's been very effective. But just because you mentioned also Pete Hegseth, and he should be discarded, he should be discharged, he should be dismissed, his resignation should be demanded, all of those things that you were mentioning a few minutes ago. Well, President Trump is saying this. Maybe this will be of interest to you, John. Just today, he said he's going to ask Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to review what kinds of information should be classified. He wants Pete Hegseth's opinion on this Signal group chat and whether there really was any sort of classified information there. The White House has insisted. The White House has insisted that no classified information was shared in the chat, even though there were American F-18 fighters referred to and MQ-9 drones and the entire.
If this had been Joe Biden, let me tell you, the Republicans would have been up and thundering.
Sure.
And that's what we have to do.
Yeah. Ask whether he would ask Hegseth if flight times and sequencing should be considered classified. Trump replied that he would consider it. Sure, I'll ask him. Sure, I will. You can view that two ways, frankly. There's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I'd certainly ask him to take a look.
No, it's very clear. Donald Trump is not in control of his own services. This is the weakest president in terms of grasp of what's going on of any president in American history. It is an absolute disgrace. And if it's any consolation to everybody, there's a recent poll out on rating the presidents, and Donald Trump ranks at the bottom, which is where he belongs.
You saw what he's talking about with Greenland. He continues to get on that. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. He said, we'll do whatever we have to do. Do you think that's a distraction, or is he serious about that?
I think he's serious. That's why the vice president's there. But I want to point out to you that the 5 political parties in Greenland, who generally squabble among themselves, are now united in rejecting whatever Donald Trump is proposing. And that's happening in Panama. People aren't paying any attention to the anger in Panama. People are not paying attention, although we should now, because the tariff, which was slapped on, the 25% tariff, that's going to affect all of us in terms of buying a new car. I bought my new car on December 3rd. Thank God I bought it then and not now. I would be spending another, $5,000 on a car. No, Donald Trump, this is all going to catch up with him. The problem is he's doing tremendous damage. So the next logical question is, how do you heal the damage? And I am convinced that when Donald Trump is gone and the Democrats are back in the majority and in the White House, a lot of this stuff will simply be history, but it will be history with a lesson. I actually made an offer to the University of San Francisco. I said, I want to come back in 4 years and teach a course on the Trump presidency. I think this is the greatest national disaster, bar none, since the American Civil War.
Well, again, I will discuss with you at another time whether or not the Democrats will ride to power again. But I also feel as
there's
though
no alternative. Do you understand? People say that there's no alternative, and I want to remind you.
I mean, here's the alternative narrative. The alternative narrative is that Republicans are now in control of all the levers of power. They have gone after universities. They've gone after media. They've gone after justices by calling them out by name. They're already, you talk about the judicial system. It's very much, I would suggest, on the chopping block. They will have cored out government, the institutions and regulatory structures to in any way guarantee us a safe election. And it would be very easy for this president to declare in many ways, pointing to any number of disturbances, and even just in an arbitrary way, he could declare a martial law, and he could suspend elections. Absolutely, he could do it.
I don't believe that will happen. I think suggesting that is a mistake. I want to remind people that in 1942, as World War II was beginning, there was a suggestion that the congressional elections be suspended in this country. Democrats and Republicans, people who supported Roosevelt and opposed Roosevelt, stood up together and said, absolutely not. We are going ahead with elections. I also want to remind you, elections are not national. The president completely missed the point in his executive order. We learned the lesson that it is a state-by-state decision. And I happen to believe very strongly, and I say this emphatically, there is no way that Donald Trump can move to subvert that system. And were he to try to do it, Democrats and Republicans would react with equal harshness. I believe that. You can only intimidate people, bully people so far. But we have to be very practical. What happens now, there are two things that stand in the way of Donald Trump. The courts, which I hope have the courage to stand up and speak out, and the other is the election. And those are the two things that I'm counting on.
Yeah, so he'll get to the election second. He'll take care of the courts first. I think that the idea somehow that
he's not taking care of the courts. You can't replace. Do you know what Chief Justice Roberts said? Did you report this on your program? Chief Justice Roberts said when Trump talked about and the others talked about impeaching justices, Chief Justice Roberts came out and said, no, you appeal in the court system.
Did we report it? We talked about it for a whole day, and David Katz, the former federal prosecutor, spoke of it at length. No, it's okay. But I mean, important. No, of course, we're not going to skip over something like that. But John, you were calling us back and recalling a much more civil time in America when people used to say, my distinguished colleague from Mississippi is...
No, I'm not recalling that.
I mean, that's not the way it is anymore, man.
No, I'm
He's
not
calling out judges by name. They are doxing judges. They're going after the judicial system that way, John.
And it has to be fought. Democrats and Republicans together have to fight back. And Chief Justice Roberts seems to be leading the fight against that.
Now, well, let me push back with you on that with you, because I think Roberts didn't go far enough, and here's what I mean by that. No, let me finish. Let me finish. He didn't go far enough. Do you know why? Do you know why he didn't go far enough? Okay, then let me tell you. He didn't go far enough because he didn't say, and a judge's decision from the bench has to be respected. He didn't say those Venezuelans should be brought back to this country. Yes, he didn't talk about due process. Instead, he only talked about impeachment. He covered his own ass as a judge.
I don't disagree with your basic premise that there is something seriously wrong. That's what I've been saying and talking about before numerous groups here in Northern California and beyond. But I have to believe, and maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that in the end, the hubris of Donald Trump and the Republicans will be called to account. If it's not, Mark, then we're in deep trouble as a nation, and I mean all of us. And I say that respectfully, and I understand how passionately you feel, but I'm more prepared to fight for what I believe America should be than give up on it.
I feel passionately because I see that we are in this dark place, and it was pointed out that Roberts is the one who gave him that immunity. I mean, it's crazy. This hubris comes from a place that is informed in part, John. You'd have to concede by the fact that SCOTUS gave this guy a lot of power.
There's no question that 5-4 vote. But let me also point out to you that when a president exceeds power, the court can reverse itself. And the court has reversed itself, whether Plessy versus Ferguson, on Roe v. Wade, on frankly, so many issues I can only tell you, that's what has to happen. If there is such an abuse of power, which I see happening now, I have to believe, I must believe, that the American people will react strongly and repudiate what is happening. Take a look at the polls. Donald Trump can see, but more important, the Republicans in Congress can see what's happening. And as that slide continues, and as these abuses of power continue, I believe there will be a response, a vigorous response.
I hope you're right. At one point in your run, you mentioned what would it be like if Joe Biden had done this on the signal stuff and all the rest. And I thought it was interesting that Hillary Clinton, who, as you know, suffered so horribly at the hands of Trump, lock her up and the private server and all of that. And they dined out on that and got him to the presidency, I think, largely on that. Right. So she reposted something from Piers Morgan, who, of course, is a conservative guy. And she even said, I never thought I'd be retweeting Piers Morgan, but he's right. And those who are watching on YouTube can see this now. And if you don't consider this to be classified info about imminent war plans, Piers Morgan wrote, it may be that you're too partisan to recognize the truth when it slaps you around your tribal chops.
Piers Morgan is right.
If this had happened on Biden's watch, he said, Republicans would have rightly gone berserk. And then
I have said the same thing over and over again in my public statements, but I want to be crystal clear on this. There is a reaction taking place now among Republicans. If you're right and the Republicans cave on all this, then the American system as we know it is dead. But if the American system is dead, Mark, then the whole country is in trouble, and that's why we have to fight back. We have to fight back with everything we have, and that means we've got to back the judges. It means we've got to organize for the 2026 election, and it means programs like this have to be supported by people who want to hear these kinds of discussions.
And for now, programs like this can exist, independent media. But it's definitely these are challenging times. And
yeah,
that's
it's not
why
the same, by the way, as when you and I were on KGO, because there the public airways really responded. What KGO is now, it doesn't exist anymore. What they're doing are the talking heads from KSFO. Let me just add one more thing. When this whole story broke, I turned on to Fox. They ignored the whole story.
That's right. I did the same thing. It's very funny you say that. Yeah, for an entire day.
Yeah, it was absolutely appalling. And I hope people will understand that. But the people in this country will react. I know they will, because we don't have an alternative. Otherwise, Mark, America is not the United States of America anymore.
Biden had to unilaterally declare J6ers. Well, let me just look at I'm just looking at different comments.
Biden pardoned the January 6th committee.
Declare January, including Don, a.k.a. Red Dawn, seditious insurrection, and have him incapable to unqualified for ascension to office under the 14th. Yeah, I mean, there was really a, that would have been interesting, John. Let me ask, let's run that out. I think that's William Knight in our comments had a sort of it's provocative if you run it out in a different way. Could Biden have done something with Trump, declaring him enemy of the state,
no.
Seditious
no.
insurrectionist? He couldn't have declared him such, even with the newfound immunity that SCOTUS gave him.
No. What would have had to happen is it would have had to go to court. And if you remember Mitch McConnell's comment, the reason he voted against the second impeachment was because he was convinced the courts would react. The courts, unfortunately, did not react, that is the Supreme Court, in the way that it should have. But I can't do anything more than give you my visceral reaction that we must continue to fight. I refuse to be discouraged. Every commentary I do in my own podcast and in my public appearances, all I do is talk about the violations of the Constitution. And let me tell you, having worked for Richard Nixon, I'm in a better position to understand this than most people. What Donald Trump is doing is subverting the American system, and that has to be emphasized and pointed out. By the way, I made one other suggestion that I know there's a lot of concern about the Democrats. Do you remember when the Republicans, after the 1964 election, the Republican leader in the Senate, Everett Dirksen, and the Republican leader in the House, Charlie Halleck, had the Ev and Charlie show? It's time for Schumer and Jeffries to do their own show. I think every day they should be holding a press conference, pointing this out as a unified force.
I think
Arguing
Schumer should not do anything public. I think he's not a great messenger. I don't think Schumer is a good good
yeah,
messenger.
but he's the leader.
I'd rather have you every day. I like that. See what you do. You're passionate. You're a great messenger. I mean, you and I disagree on a lot of stuff, but my God, you're the kind of guy the Democrats need. And you're not some young kid who's like 35 years old and, like an AOC. You're a guy with real gravitas. They need someone like that. You got to admit, John, Schumer may be a great, he may be a great legislator, but he is not someone you want out front in the cameras. I'm sorry. He's not.
I understand what you're saying, but what I need are Democrats standing together. The Democrats in the Senate and the Democrats in the House have leadership. That leadership is a very important point. And by the way, if you want to nominate me for a seat in Congress, I'd be happy to accept it. And even if I were elected, I'd join you every Wednesday.
I'd rather have you on. I really would. I'd rather have you out there in front of cameras every day. You can make a point passionately. You know how to speak. James Watson says, I think what John is saying is that as bad as things look, we can't become cynical and just give up. No one wants to give up, but I do think you have to be realistic about the challenges you're facing. But I think it's true. John is sort of saying, hey, we got to get our act together, and I believe in the American people. I don't believe in the American people the way John does. I mean, I believe in a lot of the American people, but hey, the American people just elected these guys, okay? So you can't tell me how great the American people are.
Half the American people did not vote for them. There is a vast number of people, what Richard Nixon once called the great silent majority. And I'm telling you, that majority is seeing what is happening. It's playing out before their eyes. And if I'm wrong, Mark, then our days in this country are numbered. But
well, I'll tell you this. It's not that you're wrong that there are people out there, the great silent majority, but you are, I think, naive if you think that all of those people are going to show up to the polls. They were no-shows. They were no-shows the last time. And that's presuming that we have a vote. And as you know, I don't know that that's going to happen.
I reject the notion, the language you're using completely, that there won't be a vote. If that were to happen, Mark, this would not be America anymore. We would be thundering. And the Democrats and the Republicans alike. Remember,
there are a bunch of things happening right now that aren't America anymore. It's ridiculous. Look at what they're doing in government. They have a guy and they have the richest man in the world coming in and decapitating government, destroying it, dismantling it. He has no official role in government.
I agree.
That's America?
Don't deflect. You have to focus on the simple fact. And you're going to hear from our colleague, Mr. Katz, in the next hour, very clearly what we have to do in terms of the law. And I haven't talked to him in advance, but I know that's what he'll do. But I refuse to surrender to this. I refuse to be silent about it. And I refuse to accept the idea that Donald Trump can run over everybody. He can't. We've got to stop him, and we will.
John is right, says V. Richard. I think the non-voters are against Trump. Well, dude, the non-voters are irrelevant. I mean, they are being led to slaughter, the non-voters. And at least the voters, those of us who did vote, we're being led to slaughter, but we at least voted against our slaughter.
Terry here says you're absolutely right.
Thank you. We need more Terry Taylor.
Terry, 3 cheers for you. Except if Mark is right, we are in deep doo-doo.
We are in deep doo-doo, John. All right, I'll see you next week. Love my John Rothman.
On Wednesday,
around the political world with John Rothman. Love chasing you around the schoolyard. See you, my friend.
Pleasure.
Hi,
it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.